Shalom, welcome to this week's Torah class. This week's Parsha is called Parshat Va'eira. The Torah tells us the fascinating story how Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people free." But Pharaoh refuses, and we know God bestows upon the Egyptians the famous 10 plagues. This week's Parsha discusses the first 7 of the 10 plagues. There was blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, and hail. So, we know the style of my class. I always ask, what lesson do we take from the history, from the stories of the Torah portion? You know, in Judaism, we learn that every story, every of the history in the Torah, we have to learn a lesson out of. What do we grow? How do we change our lives for the better? From the story of the plagues, what lesson could we have? The Egyptians suffering, the Jews, the Hebrews standing back and watching. How is that making them better? How is that growing? What lesson do we take out of it? So to illustrate this, let me tell you a fascinating story. Over 200 years ago, in a small town in Poland, lived a fellow by the name of Shmuel. Now Shmuel was a Torah scholar. He was no chassid, but all he knew was to study Torah, to teach Torah, and that was that. But he had 2 problems. His wife and his daughter. What was the problem? His daughter was reaching marriageable age, and they needed to have money to throw a wedding, to marry her off, to support her future son-in-law with a dowry. Now, this Reb Shmuel had no money to his name, and his wife really wanted Shmuel to go find somehow money to be able to make a wedding. Shmuel didn't know what to do. Shmuel had 3 expertise: studying Torah, teaching Torah, and being separated from the world. He didn't know what to do. There were many people that suggested to him to go to one of these Hasidic Rebbes to ask a blessing for his situation. But he was no Hasidic follower. But his back was against the wall, and he was forced. He said, "I have nothing to lose." So he traveled to one of these Hasidic towns, and he went to the Rebbe that lived in that town. Now the Rebbe, his name was Rameir of Premishland. This Reb Shmuel makes a private audience. He comes to the Rebbe, and he lets out his request, he lets out his sorrow of the situation that he has no money to his name and he has to marry off his daughter. The Rebbe, listening, looks at him with a clever look, takes out his pipe, wanting to smoke. And the Rebbe says, "Listen, Reb Shmuel, I need to smoke in order to think about the response to your question, to your request. But the problem is, my pipe cleaner broke. Could you do me a favor? Could you take my old pipe cleaner and get it fixed by a blacksmith? Here is some money." Shmuel had no choice. He was kind of stuck. So he accepted and went out looking for a blacksmith. While he's looking, he couldn't find no blacksmith. No blacksmith wanted to take this old pipe cleaner and fix it. They said, "Oh, go buy a new pipe cleaner." Shmuel was thinking to himself, look what happened to me. I was a Torah scholar, and suddenly now I'm a servant. This is absurd. Finally, he finds this old blacksmith at the edge of town that agreed to fix this pipe cleaner. He said he knows how to do it. So Reb Shmuel goes to this blacksmith, and he sits down and watches how this old blacksmith is hitting the hot metal and reforming the pipe cleaner. Over time, he started getting fascinated with the work of this blacksmith, and they started getting into a conversation. And he realized this blacksmith is actually a wonderful person, and he was enjoying immensely their conversation. During their conversation, the blacksmith tells over to this Reb Shmuel that many years ago he was quite successful, but tragedy struck and his house burnt down, and unfortunately his wife and daughter died in the fire, and he was left with nothing. Not long afterwards, many new blacksmiths moved into town, and no one wanted to hire this older blacksmith, and he lost all his money, and he wasn't even getting any jobs. So he was quite happy to take this job from this Reb Shmuel. During their conversation, the blacksmith picked up this anvil that he uses for blacksmithing, And he says, underneath, I have all the money I saved up during my lifetime. But it's all worthless because I have no family, I have no friends besides you. Could you come back tomorrow? I would love to. I enjoyed immensely our conversation. Please come back tomorrow. Shmuel agreed and departed late in the evening. He couldn't go to the Rebbe, so he went to sleep. And the next morning, after morning services, he was on his way to the Rebbe to present his pipe cleaner. And he heard a commotion in the marketplace. What happened? Apparently, that night, the blacksmith, this old blacksmith, passed away, and the community, the burial society, was trying to sell off this poor man's belongings. So no one wanted to buy these old, worn belongings of the old blacksmith. Reb Shmuel right away took all the money he had and bought the property. He goes to the property, picks up the heavy anvil, takes out the bag of coins, and goes and presents it to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, you know what, thank God, everything worked out. The Rebbe told him, no. I saw that this blacksmith had money that could be going to a good place. And I decided that you were the right fit for it, and I knew about it. So Reb Shmuel walked away with 3 lessons. Number 1, he realized that God is a lot greater than what he thought he was. And God has miraculous ways, and God does things very interestingly. The second thing he learned from the Rebbe, that tzaddikim, that righteous people, are greater than what he thought they were. And the third thing he learned was that people, from this blacksmith, he learned that people are greater than what he thought they were. Now, going back to our original question on our Torah portion, what do we learn out of this? So we know the fundamental commandment, the first commandment that the Jews received on Mount Sinai was, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God that took you out of Egypt. So, we know that God took the Jews out of Egypt and he gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai. How did he give us the Torah? Through Moses. Moses led the way through the 10 plagues. He took the Jews out of Egypt, brought them to Mount Sinai. So we see the greatness of the ways of God. We see the greatness ways of Moses, of tzaddikim, of holy people. And the third lesson we learn out of people is Mashiach. How is that? We know that Mashiach will unify everyone. And he will show and teach people how we could actually believe in one another. We know that when the Hebrews, when the Jews left Egypt, the Gentiles, the non-Jews suffered. The Egyptians suffered in the Red Sea. But it says that in time of Mashiach, even the Gentiles will see the wondrous ways of God and will believe in the fact that there is one God and will be able to witness it and appreciate it. So Mashiach will bring a belief into people. People will be able to believe into one another and see the good in one another. And that is the lesson we learn from this week's Parsha. That through God doing all this miraculous ways, taking us out of Egypt, and through those plagues, we learn out that we could actually appreciate one another, and may we witness the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom.